I still remember the exact moment I realized something was seriously wrong. I walked out onto my land and froze as I saw HOA workers already on it, unloading equipment and marking boundaries as they owned it. Before I could even speak, one of them told me the HOA had approved full construction of a community clubhouse. I asked who gave them permission to enter private property, and that's when Karen stepped forward with a calm smile, acting like the decision was already made. She said the land belonged to the HOA now and that I should not interfere with progress. For a few seconds, I thought I had misheard her, because the confidence in her voice didn't match reality. That was the moment everything shifted, and I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a direct violation of ownership, and I knew I had to respond carefully from that moment. I had owned that land for years, long before the HOA ever started pushing outward from their neat little gated world. It wasn't just empty space to me, it was fertile ground, legally registered in my name, something I protected and managed with care, like everything else I built from the soil up. But I also knew I wasn't the only one watching it. Developers had come before with polished smiles and inflated offers, trying to convince me that selling would be the smart choice. The HOA followed soon after, always polite at first, always persistent later, as if repeated requests could slowly weaken my answer. I said no. Every single time, even when they tried to dress it up as community growth or future planning. Over time, it became clear this wasn't a random interest. They had been circling that land, waiting for a moment when I might slip. Because in their eyes, anything not controlled eventually becomes something to take. The first sign that something had changed wasn't a phone call or a letter. It was the sound of engines before sunrise. Heavy trucks rolled in while the land was still quiet, and by the time I stepped outside, the transformation had already begun. Wooden stakes were driven into my soil, marking lines that had no legal meaning, and temporary fencing was being stretched across ground that had always been mine. Workers moved with the kind of confidence that only comes from believing no one will stop them. I didn't interrupt them right away. I just stood there watching, trying to understand how they had convinced themselves this was acceptable. When I asked one of the supervisors what authority they were working under, he avoided my eyes and said the HOA had finalized everything. That was when I noticed Karen in the distance, standing as she belonged there more than I did, calmly overseeing it all without a hint of doubt. She didn't rush to explain anything because in her mind, nothing needed explaining, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. Karen didn't walk over like someone checking a project. She arrived like someone inspecting territory she already believed was hers. Sunglasses on, posture straight, voice steady in that practiced way people use when they expect no resistance. She didn't ask what I thought or acknowledge my presence as an owner. Instead, she spoke to the workers and announced that the land had been approved as community property and that the clubhouse project was moving forward as scheduled. The way she said it made it sound like reality itself had already been rewritten. When I asked her what documents supported that claim, she smiled slightly, almost amused, and said progress didn't wait for unnecessary delays. There was no hesitation in her tone, only control. Standing there, I could feel the contrast between us growing sharper. Her certainty built on assumption, mine grounded in law she hadn't bothered to respect, and I realized this wasn't just arrogance. It was deliberate overreach dressed as authority. I didn't argue after that. I didn't raise my voice or try to physically stop anything, because I knew that emotional reactions were exactly what they expected from me. Instead, I stepped back and started observing everything with a different mindset. Every truck that entered, every material delivered, every conversation between workers and supervisors became something I quietly recorded. I took photos from different angles, noted timestamps, and saved every detail I could gather without drawing attention. I even reached out to a few people nearby who had seen similar disputes before, making sure I had witnesses if I ever needed them. Meanwhile, the construction didn't slow down, it actually accelerated. The HOA seemed encouraged by my silence, as if my lack of reaction meant surrender. Karen especially grew more confident, treating the entire project like a guaranteed success. But what they didn't understand was that silence isn't the absence of action, it's preparation. And while they kept building faster, I was building something they couldn't see coming, piece by piece, in plain sight. It didn't take long before the story around me started changing. At first, it was subtle. Small comments from neighbors, then longer conversations that carried a different tone. The HOA had begun shaping the narrative, suggesting that I was the one delaying progress, that I was blocking something meant for the entire community. Karen was at the center of it all, presenting herself as someone trying to build something beneficial while dealing with an uncooperative landowner. I could feel the shift happening around me even when I wasn't present, like I was slowly being pushed into a role I never agreed to play. People who once greeted me normally started questioning my intentions, and that pressure was intentional. The more they painted me as the problem, the more justified they felt in continuing construction without pause. Karen seemed to thrive in that environment, using the growing misunderstanding as fuel to move faster, as if public perception alone could override ownership and law. And I realized the real battle wasn't just on my land anymore. It was in everyone's mind. That's when I stopped reacting entirely and focused on preparation. I met with a lawyer who specialized in property disputes, someone who didn't interrupt when I explained everything, just listened and took notes with a calm expression that told me he already understood the direction this was going. I laid out everything I had collected: photos, timestamps, boundary records, communication logs, and witness statements. Piece by piece, the situation stopped looking like confusion and started looking like a pattern. He organized it all into a structured case and pointed out something important. Timing would matter more than urgency. If we moved too early, they would only adjust. But if we waited, let them continue building, every new structure would increase the weight of their liability. So we didn't rush. We stayed patient. While they believed silence meant weakness, it was actually coordination. Every day they continued construction, they were adding to the eventual cost of what they had already done. And for the first time, I could see the situation not as chaos, but as something carefully shifting toward control on my side. The courtroom felt quieter than I expected. There was no drama, no shouting, just a steady tension that filled every seat as both sides prepared to present their case. The HOA came in confident, leaning on the idea that the project served the community and that everything had been approved through internal decisions. Karen sat close to her legal team, holding herself stiffly, as if posture alone could protect her position. When it was our turn, my lawyer didn't argue emotionally. He simply presented the timeline, one piece at a time. The property records came first, clear and undeniable. Then the construction evidence showing every stage was built without legal consent. Finally, the internal HOA communications appeared on screen, and that was where everything shifted. Messages that admitted uncertainty, ignored warnings, and still chose to proceed. The confidence in the room started to break down. Even Karen stopped reacting. When the judge finally spoke, the ruling was direct and absolute. The construction had been unlawful from the beginning. Ownership of the structure was transferred to me without compensation, and the HOA's claims were dismissed entirely. In that moment, everything they built stopped belonging to them at all. I didn't turn the moment into a celebration, because there was nothing loud about the way things ended. The clubhouse they fought so hard to build on my land slowly became something entirely different under my control. What was meant to be a symbol of their expansion turned into storage for farming equipment, supplies, and everything that actually served the land instead of ego. The HOA was left dealing with financial damage they couldn't easily recover from, and Karen's authority inside the community quietly dissolved over time, replaced by silence and avoidance. I watched all of it settle without needing to anything further. What stayed with me wasn't anger, but clarity. Patience had done what confrontation never could, and silence had carried more weight than any argument ever made. In the end, it wasn't just about land anymore. It was about understanding that control doesn't always come from speaking first, but from waiting long enough to let truth do the work itself.